See what you're getting at. So it sounds like Trump is trying to create this narrative that he's the only one who can save America from itself. And he's using this idea of manifest destiny to justify his expansionist policies. But what about the whole thing with Biden and the pardons? Did Trump say anything about that?
Yes, actually, that was one of the most interesting parts of the speech. Trump talked about how the system had been against him, but he stopped short of explicitly talking about going after his foes.
Right, I see what you mean. It's like he's trying to have it both ways. Minus, on the one hand, he's saying that the system is rigged against him, but on the other hand, he's not explicitly threatening retribution.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating. Minus, Trump is a master of creating this sense of drama and tension. And he's using every tool at his disposal to create this narrative that he is the only one who can save America.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like we're watching a train wreck in slow motion. Minus, you don't want to look, but you can't help yourself. But hey, at least it's going to be an interesting ride, right?
Well, that's one way to put it. But seriously, as Americans, we need to be paying close attention to these developments and holding our leaders accountable for their actions.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of wild rides, have you seen that new HBO series about the history of the American West?
Actually, I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but I've heard great things.
Sounds like a plan to me. And hey, maybe we could even get some of the historians from the show to come on and talk about the parallels between Manifest Destiny and Trump's expansionist policies.
Now that would be fascinating. We'll have to make it happen. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Minus, until next time. Welcome to our podcast where we explore the most pivotal moments in history that changed the course of human events. I'm your host, and today we are diving into a day that will be etched in our memories forever. Minus, Donald Trump's first day in office. It was a day that saw a flurry of executive orders that would go on to shape the nation's immigration policy, climate stance, and even the very fabric of our society.
That's a great point. I mean, doesn't it sound like something out of a movie? A single day that changes everything.
Exactly. And let's start with the big one, immigration. Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border, which is a pretty bold move, if you ask me. It's like trying to rewrite the rules of the game, but what does it really mean for the people affected?
Right. So, doesn't the 14th Amendment explicitly state that all persons born in the US are citizens? How can Trump just override that? Sigh, it's also confusing.
Well, that's what makes this so interesting. I mean, Trump's order is basically saying, we are going to reinterpret this amendment to exclude certain groups of people. It's like a puzzle, and we need to figure out how all the pieces fit together.
Okay, and what about the whole in Mexico policy? Didn't he reinstate that too? Laughs, I mean, it sounds like something out of a Wild West movie.
Yes, Trump reinstated the in Mexico policy, which means that asylum seekers will be sent back to Mexico to await their hearings. It's like, can you imagine being in their shoes? You're fleeing persecution or violence, and then you're told to just wait it out in a foreign country.
Yeah, that sounds really tough. I mean, what if you were in that situation? Would you know what to do? It's just so overwhelming.
Exactly. And then there's the environmental stuff. Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement, which is a huge deal. It's like, what does that even mean for the future of our planet?
It sounds like a pretty big deal. I've heard some people say that this could have major implications for the economy too. Pauses. How does that work exactly?
Well, the economy is closely tied to environmental policies, and by pulling out of the Paris Agreement, Trump is sending a signal to businesses and investors that we are not prioritizing sustainability. It's like what message does that send to Liddy? Are we just going to stick our heads in the sand and pretend climate change isn't real?
Wow, that's a great point. And I've been thinking, what about the whole TikTok situation? Didn't Trump postpone the implementation of a law banning that? Laughs, I mean, it's like, what's next? Are we going to ban social media altogether?
Yeah, that's right. He gave TikTok's parent company more time to buy a majority stake. It's like, what does this even mean for the future of social media and free speech in this country? Are we going to start seeing more government intervention in the tech industry?
That's a good question. And I've heard some people say that Trump's actions on day one were just a distraction from other issues. Do you think there's any truth to that? Pause this. It's like, what's real and what's not?
Well, I think it's possible that some of these executive orders were designed to grab headlines and shift the narrative. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that these policies have real minus world implications for millions of people. It's like we need to stay focused on the substance of these issues, not just the spectacle surrounding them.
Right. And finally, what about pardoning off those Capitol rioters? Didn't Trump issue pardons for nearly 600 people who stormed this Capitol? It's like, what's going on here?
Yes, that's correct. He issued pardons for a huge number of people involved in the riot, which is just mind-boggling, if you ask me. It's like, doesn't this send a message that violence and lawlessness will be tolerated? What does this say about our democracy and the rule of law?
That's a great question. And I think we're just scratching the surface off what Trump's first day in office really means for this country. Pauses. Where do we even start to unpack all of this?
Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the world of politics and explore the latest developments in the use of executive power. I'm your host, and today we are going to dissect the fascinating story of Trump's return to the White House and his unprecedented use of executive orders.
That's ready, I think. So you're saying that Trump is using these executive orders to basically do whatever he wants without having to go through Congress.
Exactly. And it's not like this is a new phenomenon. It's throughout this history, there have been several thousand executive orders, according to the American Presidency Project at University of California, Santa Barbara.
Okay, I see. So it's like an AGOF presidential act minus A minus mol, where one president signs an order and the next one comes along and cancels it.
Well, kind of. But seriously, executive orders are often about political messaging. Trump signed numerous executive orders tied to his campaign promises, like increasing domestic energy production and stopping diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within the federal government.
Righty, I remember reading about that. And what about the whole thing with January 6 rioters? He pardoned like hundreds of them.
Yes, that's right. Trump offered blanket pardons to approximately 500 January 6 rioters, which is a pretty stunning move.
That's crazy. I mean, doesn't that legitimize the use of violence as a tool of political expression?
That's a great question. Implications of these pardons are far minus reaching that could have significant consequences for the rule of law.
Okay, I think I need a flowchart to keep track of all this. Laughs. But seriously, what about the implications of all these executive orders? Can Congress just block them or something?
Well, Congress can potentially block executive orders by removing funding or creating other hurdles. And there are also legal challenges based on the argument that a president exceeded his legal authorities.
Righty, I see. So it's like a big game of chess where each side is trying to outmaneuver the other. And what about the whole thing with tariffs? Trump keeps talking about how great they are, but don't they just end up hurting American consumers?
Ah, yes, the beautiful tariffs. Well, it's true that tariffs can have unintended consequences, like increasing the cost of basic goods and leading to inflationary pressures.
I hope so, E, because if he can't fix these issues, all this aggressive presidential power might be for nothing. Pauses. It's funny, E. When I was reading about all this, I couldn't help but think of that old saying, power corrupts absolutely.
Ah, yes, Lord Acton's famous phrase. Well, it's definitely relevant in this context. The question is, will Trump's use of executive orders ultimately be seen as a wise and effective way to govern, or will it be viewed as an abuse of power?
Righty, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wild ride. Laughs.
Indeed, it will. And that's what makes politics so fascinating, right? The unpredictability, the drama, the sheer spectacle of it all. It's like a never-mind-us-ending reality TV show.
Laughs. Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. But seriously, thanks for breaking all this down for me. I feel like I have a much better understanding of what's going on now.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. And who knows, it may be someday we'll be talking about the Trump presidency as a case study and how to use executive power effectively or not. Welcome to our podcast, where we dive into the complex world of politics and explore how executive orders are reshaping the country's agenda. I'm your host, and today we are going to dissect the latest move by the White House to rescind numerous executive orders from the previous administration. It's a bold move that's akin to hitting the reset button on various policies that were deeply ingrained in our institutions.
Right. I've been following the story and it seems like a huge undertaking. I mean, we're talking about rescinding over 40 executive orders, memoranda, and proclamations all at once. How does that even work? Don't get me wrong. I understand the desire to undo policies that might be harmful or ineffective. But isn't this move going to create a lot of uncertainty?
Exactly. It's like trying to untangle a knot. Each of these executive orders has its own set of implications and consequences. Take Executive Order 14,008, for example, which aimed at tackling the climate crisis. By rescinding it, we're essentially routing our approach to environmental policy.
I see what you mean. But doesn't this also open up a Pandora's box? I mean, think about all the agencies and offices affected by these orders. Department of Agriculture, Homeland Security, Justice, each has its own succession plans now in place due with these rescissions. It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
You're right. It does seem daunting. However, consider the analogy of a software update. Sometimes you need to uninstall old programs to make way for new, more efficient ones. This move can be seen as an update to our governmental operating system, aimed to streamline processes and align them with current needs.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it like that. But what about potential backlash? There are bound to be groups and individuals who benefited from or supported the previous policies. How do you think they'll react?
Well, change often faces resistance, especially when it involves sensitive topics like racial equity, climate policy, and immigration. It's similar to how people react to changes in their favorite social media platforms. There's an initial outcry, but eventually users adapt.
Right? Communication is crucial. I remember a quote from a political strategist who said that are like recipes. They might look good on paper, but if people can't taste the difference, they won't care. It's all about the implementation and how these changes impact real people's lives.
That's very insightful. Implementation is where the rubber meets the road. Success of these rescissions and new policies will depend largely on their execution. For example, the establishment of the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Hispanic Minors Serving Institutions through Executive Order 14,124 shows a commitment to education and equity.
I'm starting to understand the scope of this better. But what about the role of Congress in all this? Don't they have a say in whether these executive orders should be rescinded or not?
Great point. The relationship between executive orders and congressional oversight is complex. While the president has significant authority to issue and rescind executive orders, Congress can certainly challenge these actions through legislation or even legal action if they believe the president has overstepped their bounds.
Right, I see. So it's a delicate balance between asserting presidential power and respecting the limits of that power. But what about international implications? How do you think other countries will view these changes?
That's a critical aspect to consider. Global perception can significantly impact diplomatic relations and international cooperation. The revocation of certain executive orders related to climate change, for instance, might be seen as a step backward by some nations.
Wow, I hadn't thought about the international dimension that much. It's like the world is watching us figure out our internal policies, waiting to see how we'll engage with them in the future. This whole situation reminds me of that quote by Winston Churchill, improve is to change. So to be perfect is to change often. Sigh?
That's very apt. Change can be challenging, but it's also an opportunity for growth and improvement. As we navigate these rescissions and new policies, it's essential to keep the bigger picture in mind, creating a more united, fair, safe, and prosperous America for all its citizens.
I think that's a great note to end on. It's clear that this is just the beginning of a long conversation about the direction of our country. Thanks for breaking it down. I feel like I have a much better understanding now, Laughs.
You're welcome. It's always important to dissect complex issues and look at them from multiple angles. Remember, in the world of politics as in life, change is the only constant. How we adapt and grow from these changes will define our future. Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the latest controversies and debates.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Isn't freedom of speech already protected by First Amendment? Don't we have laws in place to prevent censorship?
The First Amendment is clear. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. What happens when it's not Congress that's doing the censoring, but rather the federal government itself or private companies like social media platforms being coerced by the government to silence certain voices?
Right? I think I see what you mean. So it's like, have you ever tried to post something on social media and it gets taken down for violating community standards? Yeah, that's happened to me before and it's super frustrating.
Exactly. And that's the problem, minus most people don't realize what's going on until it happens to them. But a recent executive order is trying to shine a light on the whole situation, making it clear that it's the policy of the United States to secure the right of Americans to engage in constitutionally protected speech.
That sounds good, I guess. But how are they going to enforce it? I mean, what's to stop some rogue government agency from just ignoring the order and continuing to censor people?
The Attorney General is now responsible for investigating any instances of censorship over the last 4 years and recommending remedial actions. It's like a big audit minus. They're going to go through all the cases where someone's speech was suppressed and figure out who was responsible. And then there will be consequences.
I see what you mean. So this is all connected to the idea of misinformation and disinformation, right? Like the government was trying to combat by suppressing certain voices.
Exactly. And that's where things get really tricky. Who gets to decide what's misinformation and what's not? Is it the government? Some fact-minus checking agency? Once you start down that road, it's a slippery slope.
Right, I remember this one time when I was in college, we had this big debate about climate change or something, and some people we were saying it was all a hoax, and I'm thinking, wait, no, that's not true. But then someone else comes along and says, actually, the science is more complicated than you think.
That's exactly what our country needs more of, minus open, honest debate. Not some sanitized version of reality where only certain viewpoints are allowed. And that's what this executive order is trying to promote, trusting the American people to make their own decisions about what's true and what's not.
I never thought of it that way. But what about okay? This might sound dumb, but what about actual misinformation? When someone is just lying or spreading false information on purpose.
We already have laws in place to deal with defamation and libel. And social media companies have their own community standards for dealing with fake accounts and spam. But when it comes to suppressing speech because it's misinformation-y, that's where things get tricky.
Rennie, I think I see your point. So this executive order is basically trying to draw a line in the sand minus between what's acceptable and what's not minus when it comes to government censorship.
Exactly. And it's not just about freedom of speech. It's about the health of our democracy itself. When we suppress certain viewpoints, we are essentially saying that some people's opinions don't matter.
I think we're about to say something, but then you stopped.
No, it's fine. Anyway, as I was saying, this executive order is a major step in the right direction. We need more transparency and accountability when it comes to government censorship.
Right, got it. So what's next? Like, how are we going to enforce this order and make sure that that the government doesn't just ignore it?
We need to stay vigilant and make sure that our government isn't overstepping its bounds. Whether it's through lawsuits, activism, or just plain old minus fashion journalism, we need to hold our leaders accountable.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So this is like a call to action, basically.
It's time for Americans to wake up and realize that their freedom of speech is under attack. We need to start paying attention to what's going on in our country and speaking out when we see something that doesn't seem right. Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the fascinating world of language and politics. Today, we are exploring how a simple name change can have far-reaching implications for national relations and even the economy. I'm your host, and I'll be guiding you through this thought-provoking conversation.
I'm excited to learn more about this topic. So, what's the big deal about renaming a body of water? Is it just a symbolic gesture, or is there something more to it?
Well, let's take the example of President Trump's proposed rename of the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf America. At first glance, it seems like a straightforward move, but when you dig deeper, it's actually quite fascinating. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the largest and most important bodies of water in North America, covering over 600 square miles.
That's a lot of water. But what about the argument that it's just a matter of semantics? I mean, does it really change anything on the ground?
But that's where things get interesting. Language has this incredible power to shape our perceptions and influence our behavior. It's like the old saying goes, minus you want to change the world, change the words. And in this case, renaming the Gulf of Mexico can be seen as a way of asserting dominance, of claiming ownership over a region that's being historically disputed.
And I'm sure I buy that. I mean, isn't it just a matter of geography? The Gulf is still going to be there, regardless of what we call it.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of construct comes in. Our perceptions of reality are often shaped by social constructs minus ideas, norms and values that are created and reinforced through language and culture. So when we rename a body of water, we are not just changing a label. We are also shifting the way we think about it, the way we interact with it, and the way we relate to other countries that border it.
That's deep. What if we renamed the Grand Canyon to something else? Would it still be the same iconic landmark?
While attachment to certain names and labels is often tied to our sense of identity and national pride. I mean, think about it, minus the Grand Canyon is an American icon, a symbol of our country's natural beauty and grandeur. If we were to rename it, would it still evoke the same feelings of patriotism and awe?
I never thought about it that way. And what about the historical context? I mean, did President Obama rename Denali from Mount McKinley back into 2015?
Yes, that's a great example. When Obama renamed Denali, it was seen as a way of acknowledging the cultural and historical significance of the mountain to the indigenous people of Alaska. But now Trump is reversing that decision, which can be seen as a way of erasing that history and reclaiming the mountain as an American icon.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, isn't it just a matter of respecting the local culture?
Well, exactly. And that's where things get really complicated. When we're dealing with issues of cultural sensitivity and historical context, it's not always easy to find a clear minus-cut solution. But what's interesting is how these decisions can reveal underlying values and priorities.
Right? That makes sense. And what about the potential impact on international relations? I mean, how do you think Mexico is going to react to this?
That's a great question. When we rename a body of water that borders another country, it can be seen as a provocative move, a way of asserting dominance or challenging the status quo. And in this case, given the complex history between the U.S. and Mexico, it's likely to be met with resistance and criticism from the Mexican government.
I can see why. It's like, what if Mexico were to rename the Rio Grande to something else? How would we react?
Exactly. And that's where diplomacy comes in. When we are dealing with international relations, it's not just about making bold gestures or assertions of power. It's also about building bridges and fostering cooperation.
I'm still not sure what to make of all this. But one thing's for sure, mine is, it's going to be an interesting few years ahead, Sai.
Indeed it is. And that's where the power of language and symbolism comes in. When we pay attention to the words and labels we use, we can gain a deeper understanding of the values and priorities that shape our world.
I think I'm starting to get it. Laughs. But I still have so many questions, Ian.
Well, that's what makes this topic so fascinating. There are no easy answers, but by exploring the complexities of language and politics, we can gain a deeper understanding of the world around us.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It's all about perspective, Sai.
Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the most intriguing stories of our time. Today, we are exploring the wild world of TikTok and its journey from being nearly banned in thus to potentially becoming a major player in global politics and technology.
Huh, yeah, that's really interesting. I was wondering, what do you think changed President Trump's mind about TikTok? I'm not sure if it's just because he started using the app himself, but it seems like there's more to it than that.
That's a great point. I believe Trump sees an opportunity for a deal, and this is just another negotiation to him. When he talks about a potential joint venture with Biden, it's like he's trying to create a win-minus-win situation, but we have to remember this isn't just about business. It's about geopolitics, national security, and freedom of speech.
Right, that makes sense. But what about the concerns around TikTok being used as a tool for spying and political manipulation? I know some people are worried that if the US doesn't take control of the platform, China could use it to influence American users. How do you think Trump's executive order addresses those concerns?
Every new innovation brings both opportunities and risks. It's like its story of the internet itself mean for global communication, but also enabled cybercrime and surveillance. With TikTok, we need to find a balance between allowing its benefits while mitigating its risks. Consider it like a highway system. You can't block all roads because of reckless drivers. Instead, implement traffic laws.
I never thought of it that way. But what about the role of Congress in all this? Don't you think Trump's executive order puts him at odds with his own party, especially with senators like Tom Cotton threatening huge fines for companies that facilitate TikTok's operations?
Absolutely, it does. Politics often involves walking a tightrope between different interests and ideologies. Trump is buying time to negotiate a deal that could satisfy both business community and security hawks in his party. It's like solving a puzzle, fitting all pieces together just right, with other players like Elon Musk and MrBeast expressing interest in buying TikTok.
Wow, that's a great point. What do you think implications are for users and for freedom of speech? I mean, should people be worried about their data or about censorship on the platform?
Our personal data is like currency. It has value and can be used in various ways. So when we talk about TikTok, we're discussing a window into millions of lives. The ideal situation would be one where freedom of speech is protected while ensuring harmful content is regulated. It's like finding the right recipe, balancing all ingredients just right.
Right, I see what you mean. And finally, what about the future of social media and technology in general? Do you think this TikTok saga is setting a precedent for how governments will handle similar issues in the future?
Every significant technological advancement has been met with enthusiasm and apprehension. The key is navigating these changes responsibly. The TikTok situation teaches us that technology policy isn't just about tech. It's about people, politics, and economics intertwined. Moving forward, governments will have to be more proactive in balancing innovation with security and privacy concerns.
I could agree more. Thanks for breaking this down. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, especially how complex the whole situation is. Right, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all unfolds side.
Absolutely. The outcome will depend on many factors from negotiations to technological advancements. It's like watching a thriller. You don't know what's going to happen next, but you can't look away.
Yes, yeah, that's so true. I think we'll have to do a follow minus up because it seems like the story is far from over.
Definitely. We'll keep our eyes on this and bring new updates as more unfolds. Thanks for tuning into our podcast today, and we look forward to exploring more fascinating stories with you in the future. Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the most pressing issues of our time. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's been making headlines lately, Trump's energy policy and its drastic departure from Biden's. It's like night and day with Trump pushing for fossil fuels and climate change denial, while Biden advocates for renewable energy and cooperation. Let's break it down and explore what this means for our future.
I was just reading about this, and it seems like Trump is trying to make good on his campaign promises. He wants to declare a national energy emergency to speed up permitting for oil, gas, and power projects. But doesn't that go against everything we've been trying to do with renewable energy? I mean, aren't we supposed to be transitioning away from fossil fuels?
Exactly. It's like they're ignoring the progress we have made. And it's not just about the environment. It's about the economy too. I was talking to a friend who works in the renewable energy sector, and he said that Trump's policies are going to kill jobs, not create them.
That's a good point. I never thought about it that way. But what about Trump's argument that we need to refill our strategic reserves and become energy independent? Doesn't that make sense? I mean, who wouldn't want to be self-sufficient when it comes to energy?
Well, yes and no. It sounds good on paper, but the thing is we are not just talking about energy independence. We are talking about climate change, air pollution, water pollution, all of these factors that affect our health and the planet's health.
I see what you mean. It's like we are playing whack minus A minus wool. We fix one problem, but then another one pops up. But what about the Paris Agreement? Trump says he wants to withdraw from it. What does that even mean for global cooperation on climate change?
Great question. The Paris Agreement is a big deal. It's an international pact to fight global warming. By withdrawing from it, Trump is essentially saying, gonna go it alone. But the thing is, climate change isn't just an American problem. It's a global problem.
Righty, that makes sense. But what about the argument that these international agreements are unfair to the United States? Trump says we are shouldering too much off the burden, and other countries aren't doing their part. Isn't there some truth to that?
Well, it's true that some countries haven't been pulling their weight, but withdrawing from the agreement altogether isn't the solution.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see your point. But what about the economic benefits of Trump's policy? He says it'll create jobs and boost the economy. Isn't that a good thing?
It sounds good on paper, but the thing is, those jobs are mostly in the fossil fuel industry, which is a declining sector. We need to be investing in renewable energy, not propping up an old industry.
Laughs, yeah, I guess not. But what about the argument that we need fossil fuels for energy security?
Oh, that's a common misconception. The truth is, renewable energy can provide just as much security as fossil fuels.
I never thought about it. That way, I guess I need to learn more about renewable energy.
Well, that's the first step, recognizing what you don't know and being willing to learn. And that's exactly what we need to do as a country, be open to new ideas, new technologies, and work together to find solutions to these complex problems.
I feel like I have so much to learn, but this conversation has been really opening for me. Thanks for explaining it in a way that makes sense.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to explore these topics and help people understand the complexities of energy policy. Join us next time on our podcast for more in-depth discussions on the issues that matter most. Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the most pressing issues of our time. Today, we are talking about the World Health Organization and the shocking decision by Trump to withdraw us from this global institution. With me is a fellow who's new to this topic, but eager to learn more.
Huh, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about the lately, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you explain why Trump is so critical of the organization? Is it really just about the pandemic?
Well, if you look at Trump's history with the WHO, it's clear that he's been frustrated with what he sees as a lack of transparency and accountability within the organization. He's accused them of being dominant-centric in the pandemic.
Wow, that's really interesting. So what does this mean for us? Now that we're pulling out, are we just going to stop funding WHO altogether, or is there some kind of transition plan in place? Sai, this all seems so sudden.
According to the executive order, thus is withdrawing due to this mishandling of the pandemic, as well as its failure to adopt reforms and demonstrate independence from political influence. Yeah, this has been the largest funder of the WHO, so this is going to have a big impact on their budget.
All right, got it. So what kind of consequences are we looking at here? I mean, are we talking about a global health crisis, or is this more of a symbolic move? Laughs, it's hard to imagine us just pulling out like this.
Public health experts are warning that this could have serious consequences for Americans' health, as well as global health more broadly. I mean, the WHO plays a critical role in coordinating responses to infectious diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS.
That's really concerning. I hadn't thought about their broader geopolitical implications. So what's the potential fallout here? Are we looking at a situation where other countries start to follow our lead, or is this more of a solo move?
It's hard to predict exactly how other countries will react, but it's possible that some might see this as an opportunity to fill the vacuum left by us. I mean, China has already been increasing its influence within the WHO, and this could give them even more room to maneuver.
Right. So what's the historical context here? I mean, how has this Midas cool relationship evolved over time? This all seems so complicated.
NUS has had a complex relationship with the WHO for decades, and it's been marked by periods of cooperation and tension. I mean, during the Cold War, the WHO was seen as a key institution for promoting global health and development, and thus was a major supporter.
Got it. So what's the personal impact here? I mean, how is this going to affect ordinary people, both in the US and around the world?
If thus pulls out of the, it's going to have real minus world consequences for people on the ground. I mean, we're talking about access to vaccines, medicines, and healthcare services minus, all of which are critical for preventing and treating diseases.
Wow, that's really sobering. So what do we do as individuals to prepare for this? I mean, are there any steps we can take to mitigate the impact of us pulling out of the WHO?
As individuals, we can stay informed about global health issues and advocate for policies that promote health equity and access to healthcare. We can also support organizations that work on global health issues.
Right, got it. So what's final verdict here? Is this move by Trump a disaster waiting to happen, or is there a silver lining somewhere?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. On the one hand, this move has the potential to create serious harm for global health and its influence around the world. But on the other hand, it could also be an opportunity for reform and renewal within the WHO.
Laughs. I guess we'll just wait and see what happens next. Thanks for explaining all this to me. It's been really helpful.
No problem. Happy to help. That's a wrap for today's episode, Midas. Tune in next time for more on global health and politics. Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the most pressing issues of our time. Today, we are going to explore the fascinating world of presidential pardons and how they can shape the narrative of a presidency. I'm your host, and I'll be guiding you through this complex topic.
Yeah, I was just reading about Trump's decision to pardon over 500 people charged in relation to the January 6th Capitol riot. Isn't it unusual for a president to issue so many pardons at once? And what's the significance of doing it on his first day in office?
Exactly. It's not uncommon for presidents to issue pardons, but the scale and timing of this are certainly noteworthy. By doing it on his first day, Trump is making a statement about his priorities and where he stands on the issues surrounding the Capitol riot.
Righty, so it's almost like he's trying to rewrite history or something. I mean, by pardoning all these people, isn't he implying that they didn't really do anything wrong?
Well, that's a great point. Pardons can be seen as a way of reinterpreting the past, of saying that maybe our initial reaction to an event was misguided or overly harsh.
I see what you mean. It's like when someone gets a second chance after making a mistake, right? But in this case, aren't there concerns that some of these individuals might not have learned from their actions, or that they might even be emboldened by the pardon?
Absolutely. And that's where things get really complex. On one hand, you could argue that pardoning people allows them to reintegrate into society and start anew, which can be a powerful tool for healing and rehabilitation.
Wow, yeah, I never thought about it that way. So what do you think is the main reason behind Trump's decision to issue these pardons? Is it purely political, or is there something more at play here?
Well, I think it's a mix of both, to be honest. Politically, this move allows Trump to appeal to his base and reinforce his narrative about the Capitol riot.
That makes sense. See, it's like when you think about the whole Tic-Tac situation. Right. Trump also halted the enforcement of that law, which is another example of him pushing back against what he sees as government overreach.
Exactly. The Tic-Tac decision and the pardons are connected in a way because they both speak to the idea of how much power the government should have to shape our lives and limit our freedoms.
I'm starting to see bigger picture here, so as some potential real minus world implications of these decisions. How might they affect the way we think about free speech, protest, and the rule of law?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Alrighty, I can see how that would play out. So what do you think is the most important thing for people to understand about these pardons and their significance?
For me, it's that they represent a fork in the road, a moment where we as a society have to decide what kind of country we want to be.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's like this is a turning point or something. And what about Biden's final clemencies? Would he pardon his own family members? How does that fit into all of this?
Yeah, that's another interesting aspect of the story. By issuing those pardons, Biden was also making a statement about the power of the presidency and the importance of family loyalty.
I see what you mean. It's almost like they're speaking different languages for something. So where do you think this leaves us as a country? Are we more divided than ever? Or is there some way forward from here?
Well, I think that's the million-minus-dollar question. In the end, these pardons and the reactions to them will either deepen our divisions or force us to confront the underlying issues that are driving them.
Yeah, it's like we're at a crossroads, and the choices we make now will have far minus reaching consequences for the future of our democracy.
Welcome to our podcast where we dive into the latest developments in politics and government. Today, we are going to explore a critical issue that's been on everyone's mind, minus the use of federal government as a tool for political warfare.
That sounds really interesting. And you're following some of these cases, and it does seem like there's a lot of selective prosecution going on. Can you give me an example of what you mean by warfare?
Well, think about it like this, minus the previous administration used law enforcement and intelligence agencies to target their perceived enemies, whether it was parents protesting at school board meetings or Americans exercising their right to free speech. It's like they're trying to intimidate people into silence.
That does seem really biased. And what about the role of the intelligence community in all this? I've heard rumors that they were involved in some pretty shady stuff during the previous administration. Do you think there's any truth to that?
From what I've seen, it looks like the intelligence community was definitely involved in some questionable activities. We know that they were spying on political opponents and leaking classified information to the press. That's not just a violation of people's civil liberties, minus it's also a threat to our national security.
Right, I saw that there's a new executive order calling for a review of all the activities of law enforcement and intelligence agencies over the past 4 years. That's a pretty big undertaking, minus. Do you think they'll actually be able to find anything?
I think it's definitely possible. We've already seen some pretty damning evidence come out about the previous administration's abuses of power. And with this order, it looks like the current administration is committed to transparency and accountability.
That's really reassuring to hear. But what about potential pushback from the other side? I mean, we know that the previous administration and their allies are still out there trying to undermine the current administration at every turn. How do you think they'll respond to this order?
That's a great question. You know, I was talking to a friend who's a former prosecutor, and he was saying that this order is like a shot across the bow of the deep state. It's a signal that the current administration is serious about draining the swamp and holding people accountable for their actions.
I never thought of it that way. It's like this order is not just about fixing past mistakes, minus. It's also about setting a new tone for how our government operates. You know, it reminds me of that old saying, power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly. And that's why this order is so important. It's not just about punishing people for past wrongdoing, minus. It's about creating a system where that kind of thing can't happen again. We need to make sure that our government is accountable to the people and that we have safeguards in place to prevent these kinds of abuses from happening.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how this all fits together. But what about the role of the American people in all this? How can we make sure that our government is working for us, not just the powerful?
That's a great question. You know, I've been saying for years that the most important thing we can do as citizens is to stay informed and engaged. We need to be paying attention to what our government is doing and holding them accountable when they screw up.
Right, that makes sense. It's like we can't just sit back and expect someone else to fix everything for us. We need to be active participants in our democracy and make sure that our voices are heard.
Exactly. And I think that's what this order is all about, minus. It's a call to action. Not just for the government, but for all of us as citizens. We need to work together to create a system that's fair, transparent, and accountable to the people.
I like the way you put that. It's not just about fixing the past, minus. It's about building a better future. You know, it reminds me of that old quote from Lincoln, "Dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the story we present."
I love that quote. And I think it's especially relevant right now when we are facing so many challenges as a country. But you know what? I'm optimistic about the future. I think we have the potential to create something truly great if we are willing to work together and challenge ourselves to be better.
Yeah, me too. It's like we've been through tough times before, and we've always come out stronger on the other side. And with this order, it seems like we might finally be starting to turn a corner and move in the right direction.
Exactly. And you know what they say, minus life, the two lemons make lemonade. Well, I think we're being given a lot of lemons over the past few years, but with this order, it's like we are finally starting to make some progress.
Laughs, that's a great way to put it. And you know what? I think that's exactly what we need right now, minus a little bit of optimism and a lot of hard work. If we can do that, I'm confident that we'll be able to create a brighter future for ourselves and for our country.
Absolutely. And that's why this order is so important. It's not just about fixing the past minus, it's about building a better future, one where our government is accountable to the people and where we can all thrive.